and I'll talk about that in a little bit more detail. So now on to the Odic energy, which is a term which is coined, through derivation in language by Reichenbach, Baron Karl von Reichenbach. He earned the title of Baron due to his accomplishments, and he's over there on the right. And I have all these guys here. You got Steiner, then Tesla, Schauberger, Keeley, Reichenbach, Reich, lower left, Walter Russell, Marcel Vogel, and Kozyrev, Russian scientist known for torsion mechanics. And basically what you find throughout history is a number of independently people were studying different angles of approach. Tesla, known for electromagnetics, and Tesla was an ether guy. He completely denounced the idea that the ether didn't exist and basically criticized the hell out of everybody when science tried to pull that out of the equation. Schauberger had his own special thing going on with water, but he observed the same colors and energies that von Reichenbach observed with his sensitives. And Keeley was strictly a vibration music guy, that it was all about vibrations, whether it was light, this or that. And they all did very complex work. Even Vogel, he worked for IBM here. You can see all his measuring devices in the background and the way he studied it technologically. And the most common is probably orgone accumulators, Reich over here. And so Reich used the term orgone, DOR, deadly orgone, and life-giving orgone, and von Reichenbach used Odic, and the negative was the growth form or the accelerator, inertia preserving. And we now know with magnetic fields that there's a truth to this, but it's not really the magnetic field, quite the opposite. So now we understand it scientifically, so we can go into this a little bit deeper, and it does validate a lot of the chemical behavior that's known conventionally and the electrodynamics, that if you go beyond the basics. Geometry plays a huge role in this, and geometry in a way is vibration. So it's vibration, geometry. Every atom is a multiplicity of vibration. And so there's, just like the Earth, there's a wobble vibration, there's the rotation on its own axis, and then there's orbit. So you see three frequencies there in one relative body, basically. And so the atom is pretty much understood to be the same type of energy field. Here's Reich, the orgone motor, and so he had his own way of showing the chakras, and basically, if you understand electromagnetism, and Russell's probably the best. All these guys are saying the same thing artistically with different forms. Tesla even patented ways to understand the number system. Today you have the VBM, which is mapping out how these subtle energy fields flow. In this case, the Odic energy. Schauberger, obviously a lot of stuff there. And there's Keeley, with the triplet patterns, the three inside of one and the triplets. And this is what he said matter was comprised of and bundled. So Walter Russell, he had the atoms categorized. Walter actually transmuted metals and had, proof of that, and predicted elements 30, 40 years before they were discovered, just based on their musical place on the elemental table. And things like this allow us to mix elements together, kind of like a musical tuned orchestra, rather than just going, hey, it's got gold and silver in it, and we chucked it in there. So it's, it's an orgone accumulator or an Odic generator. The quality is based on the relationships, and they're based on vibrational relationships, which can be tracked back to certain positions and behavior on the atomic tables, all the way down to chemistry. And now we'll touch into a little bit about the Odic energy and how it was interpreted by Reichenbach. So Reichenbach, basically, all those other guys did a ton of intense technical research to gain very little in some senses as far as understanding it, even though some of them were very well accomplished, like Tesla, at executing it. Tesla never really talked about this stuff. I think it was this kind of secret weapon in doing things, and he kind of kept the secret teachings, back in those days, to himself. But there's no question that He was directly using this type of physics to work with energy fields and create vibrational patterns that accumulate energy themselves. So no secret that Tesla was kind of a free energy guy and heading down that road. So the Baron was a conventional guy. So it's not like this guy was completely eccentric and just came up with this stuff. He was a very well carved out, authentic scientist. And he conducted his studies with human being sensitives, using human beings as the instruments. And he, in the short reports, they talk about the visual, and how he would find sensitives and he would trial them, and then he would do double blinds. And everybody, if he had 10 people in a dark booth, they would all report similar things if they were qualified sensitives. And the Russians have done a lot of work like this too. And the reason why they're much further ahead with subtle energy technologies and shape power and accumulators than we are. But this is subtle energy, and it has certain properties that's been observed, and that's kind of what we're going to get at. Is it's not really instantaneous, it's slow. Perhaps that's why it's been overlooked, is because the whole society way of science is faster, smaller, bigger, more. And this is a very subtle, slow change that happens in the environment, kind of like micro feng shui, if you will, that the room just feels better when it's arranged differently. And these affect the way subtle energy flows. Oh, by the way, I don't want to overhaul this. I said I'd have questions, and it wasn't the root topic here. Before I forget, does anybody have any questions on the network structure? I'll keep moving, and if I see it pop up, I'll address it. So he used healers and sensitives, and that became his best way. But he also used wires and temperature and water. And I'm not going to put a lot down in writing, but I picked out some passages to familiarize ourselves with the principles and the observable subtle changes that occur with these types of energies. And all the people, by the way, Schauberger, Tesla didn't talk about it a whole bunch, but he definitely knew about it. Reich, with his orgone, the Chi, the Prana, the Easterners. Consequently, because of language, there is a lot of, if you just take it at face value, there is a lot of contrary statements, and I believe I can help diffuse that. And it goes into the use and the functionality of the carbon gene series and those chargers on how to use them and how not, which will be much better organized when the product releases. But this is kind of a precursor to working with Odic Energies. The standard structured water unit is, and water itself is an Odic accumulator. Ode negative typically is what it's going to lean to. But it does store Ode positive, which is basically suppression of growth. And these things are necessary in nature. Like in the fall, when the sun, gets low, the plant goes into the take apart mode. And basically, I've talked about it in every past webinar. You have two basic forward forces, that which puts things together, and that's which takes things apart. And looking at the direction of things helps us really understand it. And overdoing it is always overdoing it. Too much, in other words, is what gives us toxic or energy that starts to go sour. And so you can get opposite effects out of these things, and people in different states, depending on their body charge. We've talked about this, that, their pH could be balanced, but they might be negative or positive on the pH. And this gets us out of a little bit of the issue with conflicting data with, drink alkali water and all this stuff, which ironically in the subtle energy world, alkali water is what you shouldn't drink. But everything close to center is just fine. Alkali water would actually slow you down. So I guess if your system's overhauled and you're too fast, you feel that, or that, then alkali water is helpful in that standpoint. So you can use these energies if you feel like things are over accelerated and you need to slow down. You can lean a little bit towards the South Pole and slow things down. Most of the time, it's going to be beneficial to use the North Pole or the right spin geometry or the negative ode or the positive orgone. So all these different languages, right? And we'll just stick with the Odic terms and how they correlate to electromagnetism. And it's important to realize that the human being is still the best instrument. There's a lot of sales job going on over AI in the future, and you need a computer chip in your brain. And all this stuff is kind of a joke to justify all the development and one-way street of logical calculation, in my opinion. There's really no substance behind it. It's not hard to understand what AI is, and somebody has to define a target in order for AI to work. So if the target isn't what everybody agrees on, then you have AI targeting something that one person came up with is what, is the solution for everybody. And that never works. Human beings and relationship with water in particular, in my opinion, are much more powerful. Computing, it ends up being an intuit because you don't have to go through all the calculations and the programming. It just kind of happens with the end, and you don't need to explain and have all that. So the Odic energy, and in particular the Odic neg, and this is where we keep running into trouble of people making assignments. So I'm just going to have to go with what the correlation here is between Odic negative and what it correlates to electromagnetically. And right off the bat, it's the North Pole, but it has nothing to do with the magnetic field. That's what's really cool about this work, is there's a whole body of industrial work and things such as that that suggest it's the magnetic field that does the work. And indeed, water does react to a strong magnetic field. If you have a water container floating on water and you give it a pull, it'll push away from the lines of force of the pressure magnet. And that's what we know today, is the magnetic field is actually lines of pressure, which we talk about it all the time. Pressure, heat, too much pressure, too much heat. These things cause a deterioration, basically, of the body. And in this case, we are typically applying it to water or the environment, whatever. So these subtle forces pervade all things: metal, wood, plastic. There's been no material that's been found that really stops it, though it does work around and over the top of when viewed and seen, whether it's Carillion, viewings of it, or sensitives. There's a lot more to be determined by a sensitive than through Carillion photography. We can't really make a great correlation with electrical engineering and electromagnetics because they really don't know how. They still say the electron is a negative body, and that's where a lot of this oxygen, electron storage, electronegativity comes from. And that's really where it's headed, and whether it has room or not. And I don't want to beat that down because historically we've covered that in some serious depth, and it's time for simplification. So these principles that I'm going to go over here, and I think we're pretty good on time now. Just quick notes direct from Reichenbach's work. They're more or less the design basis for where the units are going, used as chargers themselves, or just like the old portables as a poured through device. And the higher forms of them, which will be released later, will probably do a lot more on the pour through, but are a lot more capable of being overcharged. And based on my research, if you overcharge the North Pole, which is normally the right spin mechanic, which is growth and energy and the things we normally look for, the pole flops. And so you get the same effect as you would if you used the wrong pole to begin with. So these kind of need to be understood and used by enthusiasts and with some training so they don't get misused. And the reason for the educational process coming through in the way we're doing it. So I'm flipping through my notes here. When this Odic energy is cross-referenced to all these other forms, we get basically the same descriptions, though there is some conflict. Definitely not a science. Science can be applied to it, but all those individuals that I showed in the beginning, basically they all discovered the same thing in different ways with different apparatus and mechanisms on how they worked. And getting down into the flow of things, more or less. Little side notes, with his sensitives, if they had any metal on their body, their ability to perceive things was strongly dampened. So if they had a ring on or a necklace or a bracelet, doesn't matter whether it was copper or all that, and those can have a positive effect on things, but it really detuned them to the observation of what was going on. And ironically, some of these materials that we get into that you hear are good for water are actually going to be opposite of what, because of the form is incorrect. And we'll get a little bit into Ormus because that's into the equation too, as far as how it relates to the subtle energies. So it can create a physical force, and a number of experiments are done there. Tesla observed these physical forces with what he called brush discharges. So he used a light emission stream to detect these things and saw that it moved according to these forces. The presence of a plant or a human or living things were much stronger. But all things, all substance to some degree, the most sensitive could even see an object of any sort glowing. And what Reichenbach used to do is tell them there was going to be an object in there. They needed to look for something. And then qualities of it would verify room to room to room for the science of it. And then he would dummy it up where he wouldn't put anything in the room and see. And basically his good sensitives would come out and say, I didn't see anything. So that's how he controlled the experiment. So the Odic force, coined by in 1852, he tested the ability of senses to detect energy from a crystal is where he started. He used their left hands primarily for sensing because the right hand has an opposite Odic polarity. So these sensitivities get down so much that you can perceive things differently depending on what side of the body it's exposed to. But through reduction and isolation, it was easy to identify that the left hand is more the receiving force and the right hand is more the giving. So if something is giving off energy and you put it in the right hand, there's a little bit of an opposition that occurs. And then the sensations flip, even though not to the same degree. And I've experimented with some of this with the Odic chargers, known as the Carbon Gene Series coming out, and definitely with overcharged water, you can tell it's flipped. A little bit more work to do today to clarify things and how to use them, but that's the general. The color of light perceived by the eye of the sensitive, the feeling of the temperature on the left hand were consistent. This led Reichenbach to conclude he was observing a repeatable physical phenomenon. From there, he went a lot deeper into it. And basically, the North Pole of a magnet in the center emits a flame or wafting-like wave of light that's always blue when it's in the right, the growing form, and the South Pole is red. The blunt end of a crystal is red. The sharp end of a crystal, the pointed end, is the same exact as a magnet. So other than maybe the information or the direct quality, certain parts of a North Pole magnet and a crystal are identical in their emissions and their effects on how they work with things. There's a little bit of confusion with the poles that has to be sorted out. So we are talking about the magnetic north seeking pole, which is actually a south pole. But for sake of confusion, it's labeled the North Pole, and that's what we're going to talk about. So when there's movement involved in these magnets and the light's observed or it's taken through lenses, so it went this far, and blowing breezes on it and unlocking primary colors and secondary colors, basically you see the same effect as the Northern Lights, which is most famous on the North Pole. And it's kind of moving and wafting around. So the energy appears, if you can look at it in motion, much like the Northern Lights. Stronger and stronger magnets do different type things. And here, the sensitives describe colored smoke arising from the poles, which tends to be reddish over the south-seeking pole and bluish over the north-seeking pole. However, the color also depends on the orientation of the magnets. So now you get into, you don't just use magnets, you use geometry and orientations and interference patterns and magnetic field suppression because you're not really looking for the magnetic field. Consequently, the use of magnets in water has a value, and it's used in descaling. The Department of Energy talked about it, but they use very strong pressural magnetic fields. And what that does is break up the chunks, the clusters of water that are entangled for various reasons and memory and all the things most of you guys already know about. And that kind of untangles things, but that's really it. The magnetic field's so strong that on one hand, you're putting pressure forces or stress into the water to break it apart. And you got a little bit of combined with the Odic North energy. So you're getting a little bit of life force in there. But if you really, if you expose the water to a high pressure magnetic field, you're kind of taking away on one hand and giving on another. So it's very neutral in its behavior. If they use a horseshoe magnet, the two poles won't interact. Contrary, this is where the idea came up that this is not a magnetic force, because what's being observed has no interaction with each other whatsoever. The red and blue shades of emanations that are observed. And by the way, you can see this in other scientific ways and reactions, this sweep from blue to red. And for some reason, you don't see green a whole lot unless there's neutralizing resonance. And that's kind of where you combine the north and the south pole, or the left and the right spin, and you hit it right at the right spot where it's very neutral, a center point, kind of like neutral pH, like 7.0. Around in there, where there's really no measurable electrical transfer. That means the electrical and magnetic forces are not interfering with the flux lines of true energy flow. And in my opinion, water is hands down the best representation of the ether or subtle energy and how it works. So if you want to understand how subtle energies of the universe work, then study water. They're direct embodiments. A lot of the great philosophers, Walter Russell, they comment that the space of the universe is no different than water other than density. So they don't really focus on water anymore. They kind of move on to how the universe works through the obvious nature of water. And then see what else we got here. Okay. Odd is an additive. When positive odd is added to positive odd, they add together. They don't cancel. Stronger concentration of positive odd with stronger effects. So all this stuff is synergistic until it reaches a threshold where too much is too much. And I can't find any research where anybody talks about this, but personally, I've flipped over pHs in water with locked magnetic fields. A lot of weird stuff where you see a polar flop, where the acid now turns into an alkaline, and what poles it does that under, and so on and so forth at a certain point. So in other words, you overcharge the water and it flips over, much similar to how Ormus works, for those are familiar with that. So a lot of these materials don't really work all that well unless they're subjected to massaging fields first. Like Grandeur in particular uses a treated form of copper. Copper alone won't really basically a positive odd or a south pole metal. It's not a real bad one on the table, so it's not way far off the line, but generally you wouldn't use it. Schauberger coated it with silver, so when he had a little amount of silver coating the copper, that's kind of how he balanced out the forces. And silver's really right on the line. I think when you combine the two, you get a whole new electrical effect, stable electrical effect of treating it. And people like Grandeur know how to do some serious massaging and rearranging of the copper structure to get probably a magnetic field out of it. That's mostly what we're talking about rather than an actual magnetic field. Magnetic field suppression. Copper is paramagnetic, diamagnetic. It doesn't really hold the magnetic field as we measure it, but it does react pretty good with it. You take a strong magnet and rub it over copper. It'll move around and things once it charges up. Electrical charge exerts a very strong force, while subtle energy is usually much weaker. The electrical charge is conserved, which means that its quantity remains the same. It may flow elsewhere, but it does not simply disappear. I don't necessarily agree with that. I think you can make electrical charge disappear quite easily. By contrast, subtle energy or odd can decay over time and disappear. also. And notice how they keep saying over time, because it does not seem to respond instantaneously. So your Odic generating structured water unit will build up time and season itself with this energy. And I've watched this happen with water in much bigger, more industrial situations. So I'm not a believer, I'm a knower. And now it's about being artistic and subtly cultivating this stuff. And there's pretty basic things to observe about it. With these differences in mind, between electrical charge, magnetic field, electrical charge flows best in metals, while subtle energy flows in any substance. They couldn't really find a substance that it behaved much different. And it moves at about 3 meters per second, which is really slow. When I used to work with very large accumulators, I could tell they would pull flop. Later, I could measure that electrically. The pull flop would show up, but you can feel the energy change in the space. And over time, you can see different behaviors of elements. And that was the first unique thing we saw, is why isn't the steel rusting anymore when it should be? And so the steel would slightly change its structure 40 feet away, a lot of it. And what would normally make it rust, it wouldn't rust anymore. And you can do that with other ways, but we didn't do any of those processes. So it kind of did it on its own. Reichenbach found that subtle energy charge can be transferred from magnets to water or from crystals to water. He also found that the effects of positive odd from a magnet and positive odd from a crystal were indistinguishable. So you notice he doesn't say negative odd. There is a difference between that side of the coin. But the positive odd. So, if you got crystals lying around unoriented and they're facing the water, they're going to charge it the wrong way. Same thing with the magnet. If you use a balanced charge in a geometry, then you start to get the left and right spin condition that our flow form is, designed after. We don't spin in one direction. There's something like 40 vortices going on in a 12-stage unit, double vortices, when you understand how it works simultaneously in our units. So it's not really like one left spin and one right spin like the How It Works video shows. That's just an oversimplification. And in these windings, where the magnetic and the electric fields present in the water tend to cancel themselves, kind of like DNA. And there's a lot of work with this Odic stuff with DNA too that brings some interesting results, all the way down to they see DNA reformulating, basically. And that's a large claim, and I don't want to get into any of that stuff. This is experimental. This is for healers and hand healers and Reiki people, and people who are really just into water and want to make water more sensitive and program it. Here we say, if he exposed a glass of water to the North Pole of a magnet after it became charged, the sensitive in the left hand noticed it was cool, refreshing energy by taste, and in the left hand, if exposed to the South Pole or the blunt end of a crystal, the water was reported sensitive taste, warms, and prickly and mawkish. One of the it's pretty much an X series that I've had a lot of prototypes of these carbon gene units for a while right now. And if you leave it overnight, it overcharges and pole flops. So you end up with, it's a North Pole array mostly and a suppressed one. And I'll show you guys a little bit live. I'll turn the camera back on and show you a little bit what these magnetic fields actually look like scientifically, and the difference between synergizing technologies and organizing their relationships as an orgone or Odic generator versus chucking a bunch of metal into resin and saying this is orgone accumulator and you can buy one of these for $49. I can tell you right now, the materials that I use, any one of them in any unit, cost a hell of a lot more than $49 just for a few grams of the substance, because they're in the micrometer and nanometer range. The smaller you make these particles, the more synergistic they get, the better dielectric, the more surface area. And these are all conventional engineering attributes that make batteries, dielectric, switching gear, computers, computer storage memory, so on and so forth. And the low quality stuff is generally bigger and it's not very well organized. The higher quality stuff is very geometrically designed, it's much smaller, and arranged according, kind of like an orchestra of cellos and violins and brass section versus, and all these atoms have this musical quality. And that's really is, it can go deeper, a lot deeper than this, but there's really no point in turning that corner. I'll read a little bit more about, electromagnetic relationship. The nature of electricity itself was not really understood in 1850 by the mainstream. But as sensitives noticed in electrical phenomena that similar effects show up in wire and things like this. So we can't be too soon till we understand this better to program our heads that this stuff is bad and we're going to get hurt by this, and the fear-based, Wi-Fi and electrical energy, and there's truth in it. But some of it's doing good according to the science who's observed it from a life force, and some of it not so much. And everybody has to decide that for themselves and what it means and go do their own research. But simple taste and feel generally is enough. I'll read down the list here of how these things are classified. And what we're saying is, which I'll get to in the classify, and that negative odd or negative odic energy is the preferred. That's what's going to make things grow. And it's not going to stifle the cationic stage that bad, or the fruiting stage, or whatnot. So it can be beneficial for South Pole. I would say, cancer treatments, people who use magnets are going to go to the South Pole to stop bacterial growth that's involved in tumors, and the yeast and fungus and bacteria and virus. That's all part of that little triangle of cells reverting back to their primordial state of non-eukaryotic, non-nucleic rapid reproduction. And that's all that's going on. The same thing happens with the birth of a baby, but the South Pole will slow that down. So there are cases where like very strong North Pole, then it would actually make the tumor grow more, according to the research that's been done throughout history. So interesting note there. But just about, and seed sprouting can be beneficial from the South Pole. And there's a lot of other factors that weigh into this: oxygen level, pH. So this is a very simple version of looking at the world and how to arrange things for your benefit when it comes to materials and assumptions that are out there in the world. So a lot of times some of the positive odic forces that aren't so good for you can be beneficial in circumstances of balancing things out, and also have attributes that, like, you may have a high oxygen levels with structured water, but high oxygen levels don't define the structure of water at all. But that's a benefit you get sometimes with it. And the bigger thing yet is what type of oxygen you have. If it's the wrong type of oxygen, then it's not beneficial. So, use your intuition. Everybody needs to decide from themselves and experiment. And in the end, that's what working with odic forces is about. So the magnet South Pole, O plus, crystal sharp point, O negative. We talked about crystal rough end, O plus, sunlight, O negative, but switches based if it's on the horizon or not. So a lot of times you'll feel yourself get really cold, but the temperature hasn't changed that much, and you were never really sitting in the sunlight. It's kind of an overall energy shift from the spectral sense. You see the sun go red on the horizons and yellow to white in the apex. Moonlight, O positive. Everybody goes crazy on the full moon. Friction, O positive. Negative electricity, O positive. And that's interesting because you hear all the sales job on the alkaline, but then when you look at biological systems, the soil, our systems, from the esophagus down to the stomach, in through the intestines, that's all acid. So if you're going too fast and you're too acid, it can be beneficial to throw the alkaline in there, and the negative electricity from the saturated oxygens holding it in, like a Kangen generator, can be beneficial. So I'm not saying anything's good or bad here. I'm just saying what the preferred is over history. Sound, O negative. Evaporation, O negative. Chemical reaction, O negative. Mixing, O negative. Hence vortexing. Excessive turbulence or friction of fluid, O positive. So there's a limit to it. Heating, O negative. Cooling, O positive. So again, there's some conflicts here on what we say. The water has a cool, refreshing taste. It's getting fused with O negative, but then an actual measurable, significant temperature drop, they're saying, emits the opposition field. Burning O negative, releasing the stress of something. Blue violet light, O negative. Orange red light, O positive. So when you get into Dinshaw and the healing, he says the same thing. You look into the Ayurvedic energy detail, and there is conflicts along the way, like we talked about, and it's the direction back to balance. So anything overcharged heading towards balance is in a good state, even if it's kind of too much, because it's going to continue to wind down, and that's where the energy comes from. The poles are, negative when you're going away from center for too long. And the right amount, that's what allows you to get away so it can come back. So what comes up kind of must come down. If you breathe in, you must breathe out if the cycle's going on. And one's more limited and one's more elongated. And that shows up, different in the science. So I think that covers the basic of the principle. Now I'm going to read some elements and how they're classified with this. And how these elements probably are changed when they're used in benefit. So when the world hears that copper is good for water, it was probably a different form of copper where somebody knew more about it, in my opinion. So on the negative odd side, which is the growth in the North Pole, cold, soothing, blue aura. Keep driving this point in. Oxygen, sulfur, sulfuric acid, iodide, diamond, chloride of gold, sulfur, bromine, tellurium, osmic acid, gypsum, oxide of platinum, iodide of carbon, iodine, telluric acid, bicyanide of mercury, selenium, arsenic, bleaching powder, oxide of copper, not copper, potassium cyanide, borax. So you see some toxic stuff in here that's normally classified as toxic, but that's just how much again. So all these toxins are in your body naturally, basically. And you don't need a lot of them to get this to work. And that's the cool thing about the subtle energy is more is hardly ever better when you're talking about subtle energy. Phosphorus, alcohol, chromium chloride. You all know what alcohol does when it's too much. Albumin, it's kind of cell matter. Chromium oxide, graphite, silver oxide, table salt. So you see the oxidized versions, the ones that are at rest, are somewhat the preferred. Tannic acid, fumaric acid, stearic acid, a lot of the acids, groundwater, charcoal, starch, gum, sugar, obviously not good for you in refined form, but coming out of fruit, very energetic in the short term. Citric acid. On the other side of the coin, you got potassium, caffeine, chromic acid. Ironic that caffeine is in the energy depleting side, or the sharp or bitter side. Trade 10 minutes or an hour worth of energy for losing it later, I guess. Silver bromide, silver iodide, iodide of bismuth. Let's put some creosote, potash, lithium, lime, gold. You hear people making structured water units out of gold. It's probably going to have, gold's kind of on the line, so it's probably just really not going to have much effect at all. It's more just selling quality material. I would prefer white gold in the units. That's what we'll be using in some of the more advanced units. Zinc, chromium, palladium. Palladium has a strong reaction with water. And again, this is not good or bad. This is balance of the two. And nature balances these two out together, and at times leans a little bit towards the growth pattern, and at other times leans a little bit towards the suppression pattern. And you can use these to help steer your energy around, is the point. And I don't believe even though there's South Pole in the equation and elements and things like that, I don't believe it's beneficial to do a South Pole bias unit. Maybe with the research and the feedback will come up with that. So that being said, we're going to go into a little bit of the design premise, and if we have any questions, we can address them now as I continue to roll on with this. About 52 minutes. I want to wrap in about 8, and then take final questions. So a lot of what we talked about you see done in conventional chemistry. And basically, if you look at it, there's a quality of stability. So platinum and gold and titanium are very stable in different environments. But you see, like in a silver environment, silver chloride environment, it starts to switch on you a little bit. And same thing with copper. Copper switches much sooner than silver in relationship to, basically seawater. And so and this is what makes a battery. And a battery fundamentally, by definition, is an odic generator or orgone accumulator. And they just overpack the situation with charge and utilize part of that. But in the background is this subtle energy. So every battery you have is a kind of like a north and south pole magnet, but everything's compressed inside and nothing coming out until you take it out. There are schools of thought, John Bedini in particular, in monopole charging, Tesla, Faraday, Edison, I believe he knew about it. Keeley, all these guys went to the subtle side, but a lot of the other ones were communicating it through the conventional electromagnetic spectrum of view. And you can kind of read it there, what's going on with the battery equation. So you put mineral water and two dissimilar metals, and you basically now have the definition of a battery, and you can measure all this stuff very greatly. Consequently, the normal human cell, which is poorly explained, they explain it in a DC millivolts. You'll see alkaline water, people going negative 150 millivolts. There's no reference. There's no vibration. There's no asymmetry relationship in the pulse waveform. There's no discussion of pulsing. So it's just all very marketing, dumbed down with no explanation. And then it ends up getting misused and not for the benefit. And it all gets a bad rap. So to me, that's the important to getting down into this, where you can point out, like, look, nobody's talking about this. They're just throwing out that this is better. And really, all these technologies are synergistic when you blend them together correctly for you. And these are hints at what might work better for you if you want more energy. If is it a good idea to drink a highly charged water body if you go to bed? But no, now you could do a flip pull, and I guarantee you'll sense it, where you leave it charging for all day long, and then when you want to go to bed, you flip the pull. And that's going to slow everything way down or help it slow down. And it's still just water. Water is going to buffer all that like it always does. So it's a good thing. Just to tap into the little conventional. And then, we use shungite in the carbon gene series. That's where it got its name, specially structured carbon known as shungite in a natural mixture. So it's 90% shungite. A very small percentage buckyballs, they claim, when they look at all these different structures. But the bottom line is the shungite has a huge diversity of geometric structure that reacts with water more greatly. And people go, well, why I could just throw a shungite stone in my water and get the same effect. No, it's synergistic. And we don't know what the limits are. And it seems to be time exposure that gives the overcharging condition in most cases, because like we said, nothing happens fast. Water is an odic negative force primarily, though it can switch and support what the overall picture of nature is doing. The universe has to create more than it destroys. Otherwise, if the equation goes the other way for too long, then you end up with nothing but space and no congregation of matter. So that's kind of common sense when you get down to it, that it's not balanced. It is asymmetrical. It's kind of like a teeter-totter. And when you lean on one side too long, it hits bottom and gets stuck. And then it becomes the frozen condition rather than the growth condition. And the way conventional electricity says is to shove on the other side or take the weight off this side, and we can get it to move back. And that's how we get this thing going back and forth. The real way it happens is nature moves the fulcrum very small. And so there's very little motion at the center, getting your ends going back and forth and trading turns with who's dominant. But it would be the North Pole and the odic negative and the life-giving orgone energy that is the preferred. And the Easterners, with the Chinese and the India and Japan, they all have their own terms for these poles. And everybody understands the cathodic and anodic. kind of interesting, the cathodic, and this is more of a conventional chemistry chart. And if you look on this chart here, it kind of gives you what's going on. Stuff that falls apart real easy is up here, and stuff that really remains. And graphite is quite a bit further than gold on that situation as far as reactivity. And then you get your voltages over here. And like I said, a normal cell is 25 to 50 millivolts in an AC oscillation with a bias. It's not just DC current like they market it. And then you see the chart, chemical chart here, or the atomic chart, excuse me. And then you see where things fall in the value. And the electronegativity is more on the right side, and the positivity is on the left. And right around 2.2 is the change in the center line. And the stuff around the center does really good with water, silver and gold, different forms of copper, things like that. Shortcut in geometry, I've always talked about this. The whole world is comprised of the phi ratio. And here you see the blue and the red equation with 1.618 and 0.618. Just an inversion of the equation. And it's not really the pyramid that's the special shape. It's the fact that the phi ratios are built into the pyramid. And these things don't disrupt energy flow. So there's the a prototype. This is a Carbon Gene Model X. I personally use this one. I've been testing it for a couple months, trying to get down to the nitty gritty of the details of what's doing what. And real quick here, I'm going to turn the camera back on and show you guys some magnetic field patterns, what it looks like. And the whole premise behind nanoparticles and small particles is once particles go under a certain threshold of size, they don't disturb greatly the lines of flux, which are the interference patterns between these two forces, in my opinion. But you can kind of see them with a magnet without overcomplicating it. It's just nice to visualize. So these units have geometric arrays and special forms of magnets where we suppress the magnetic field. So we're trying to make the magnetic field go away, and we use the crystal portion of it. Using crystals is still a little bit of a undeveloped thing for me as far as the intensity of it. The magnets, the right magnets are a lot more powerful. And so in the case of structuring, just passing the water through, I think you get the eraser effect a little bit better on the front side, and then you get the life force energy better in the array. I'm having trouble verifying that crystal wise, but I think in the down the road models, again, in the end, use people to finalize the energies of these things that are known workers of subtle energy, proven scientifically. So there's no claims there. It's been backed up by conventional parameters in the health world, and some amazing work there. So I'm going to kill light. See if I can do a bigger picture. Guys, let me know if you see that didn't work. I was trying to make the video picture bigger, so we'll just have to work with this. You guys can see that okay? Everybody seeing the camera? All right, good. So what we're going to look at is magnetic field lines of flux. And you'll see basically a flower of life pattern. I don't know if this is going to show because the computer screen is interfering a little bit. It's got too much light, but I think you can see a glaze of it in there, kind of a crosshatch pattern. Then you turn sideways like this. See if we can get, yeah, it's not going to work too good because of the light. At any rate, I've showed this before on in some of the other slides. And so the idea behind the nano and the small particles, and the smaller you get, is these particles don't disturb these natural flux lines that occur. And that's why they work better, and they conventionally work better in, electrical engineering too. So you see the unit here has a charging device. It has a cap. See, I'll get a prototype here. So different paint jobs, different scenarios, very custom. So they have a storage. You seal the water in there and let it charge over time. The bottom's got a cap, and that seals the water off. It's very hydraulically tight. So if you have a storage carafe or whatever for this one, that top does the trick. This one here, this one's full of water right now charging. And this would be the Carbon Gene Model S, which is basically going to be fully contained in walls of shungite of a 60-sided geometry. You can see the sides here. There's 12 sides and there's pentagons in there. And there's an inner wall, and that's filled with liquid glass and shungite. And these will probably be the chargers you can leave going on for much longer and take longer to, and are softer to fully charge. They're going through just, kind of daily use and things like that. So you can see the cork in here, and that allows it to store, setting it on my computer in that position, and it won't leak water, and it can charge that way. So it's real simple to charge up. The Model S probably cannot see pics, these things you are describing. Yeah, you might not have your things set up right for it, but everybody who's got their video monitoring thing everybody said they could see it. So unless I messed something up in between there, I think that's related to you. So that's kind of the overview of the design. And now I'm going to go over some of the materials that are in it, and then we'll wrap it up. So it is a portable unit, but it is a much more functional orgone accumulator, Odic generator. These are a lot of the things that people put around cell phone towers, and there's movements and a lot of grassroots stuff. And you can, the really high quality orgone accumulators sell for thousands of dollars because they're made out of particulate gold, silver, copper. The magnetic array in the Z is something like, let me see, $250 worth of special magnets in there. So these are not for cheap, but the Model S will probably start with the discount. The 10% discount will probably be the same as our old portable. So basically the same concept, except you have geometry, storage capability, and full shungite encasing with a tinge of ormus and the white gold form. And all the units will have a little bit of ormus in them. So ormus, I don't have time to go into that. Maybe we'll cover it in another one, but you can look it up. Hudson found some interesting stuff. It's a very interesting story. Silver, copper, silver-coated copper, shungite, trace elements, seawater, and then the ormus form, where we might not actually get the whole pole flipped over on some of these vibrations, but they'd get massaged in the right direction to be more reactive with the water. And basically you're not changing the identity of anything from how it registers on a mass regimen, which is how we identify everything. Basically, shoot a bullet and measure how much the bullet bends and then define it from there. But I've had experience with this type of thing, and it's not a good way to identify the character and quality of things overall. You can change the property of things, and that's what ormus deals with. Atomic spin states change the frequency emission interaction. So when you look at certain elements, they don't show up on the machines, but they're nonetheless there. And you'll hear secrets about black gold and all these things and in the lore of the history, but there's a lot of substance to it. And just like an atom can pull flop from being over conditioned or conditioned to change to the condition you want it to go to, and still retain the informational properties, which there's addressing that is a huge other issue. These are just basic functions. So you have informational aspects of gold and silver and copper that are superimposed over the bigger vibration. Just like if you said the earth was 24 because it takes 24 hours to rotate. And that was the idea of the Earth. Well, look at the surface of the Earth and all the complexity of information that goes on it has nothing to do with just how often it rotates. So I'm excited about these products because I want to personally get more intimate with the use of simplifying medicine and healing and using water as a means to water can be a great teacher. My best teacher. Felt like I learned a lot from it, from just observing and responding and working with it until things felt better and then factually started working better. So that's about it for an intro for the Carbon Gene, and I'll take a few minutes to field any questions on any of the topics we covered, from the network to the basic Odic energy situation down to the design platform of the Carbon Gene series, which will probably come out quarterly. And it'll be an S model, which is shungite, trace minerals, and ormus, white gold. And then that same recipe with the additives that make the XYZ models. The X model will favor copper. The Y model will favor silver. And the Z model will be a combination of both with some other special additives to really kind of make the mother mode of the Odic chargers. And Von Reichenbach referenced that it took about 6 minutes to charge with, crystals or magnets of the right type. And I would say these can go a bit longer to get the full effect, but there is a threshold. So again, experimenting, fun, no science here, no healing claims, no nothing, but a very capable unit as far as personally directing water to do more for you, whatever that may be, including just be in the room. So because we add water to it, and now you can control the type of water, right? So if you put white gold ormus into the water and put that into the unit, you have a pleomorphic condition of water going on with the environmental space. So these are kind of alive orgone accumulators and very high quality ones, or Odic generators, all the same thing. And I think they're going to be really beneficial for people. I wish I could do more about the cost of some of the higher end, but gold's gold and palladium's palladium, and it's pretty expensive stuff. And it's for those people who can afford it and are really into it. And I was only going to do the high end and just put out the best unit I could do, but I decided we could put out a range to work for a wider group of people and have a significant benefit over the standard model unit. The flow form technology is identical. I didn't mess with that any. And a few people have mentioned that with the Model X, they can tell the difference in the pour through significantly. I can a little bit. It's not huge for me. Different people with different sensitivities. Do you use the water that's charging in it? Yeah, I believe I talked about that. Basically, that's what's beautiful about this. It's really simple. They're going to be negative odd chargers or positive orgone life-giving. Turn the camera off back here so the recording doesn't glitch. I don't know how far the field goes. I've heard people make claims of, 1,000 feet, 100 feet. I mean, who knows? You can't measure it. Visibly, you can see the fields around these things. Apparently, I've never had a sensitive stare at this for 4 hours in the dark and tell me what they see, because I'm using the research to establish that. And then the taste and the feel and how my body performs after I consume it. So, an hour charge on the Model X, which has about a half suppressed magnetic field array in it, certain geometry, feels really good to me. An hour. I can easily replace coffee altogether with it. Doesn't mean I don't, drink coffee or do things that I like anymore, but lets me, decide that, hey, if I'm looking for more energy and I don't want the negative side of things, this is what it's for. Shungite has its rumors about EMF fields. In this case, we have shungite surrounding the water. So there's an obvious reduction in actual radiation that water is exposed to. So in a way, you could look at it like isolation chambers are getting popular for people to allow the body to heal. And you're just a big sack of water. So basically, you're isolating your sack of water from radiation and getting everything quiet. Turning all the radiation off and letting your body reset is a very popular methodology. And I would say, in a way, we're doing that for the water you're going to put in your body. So in a way, it's a lot more practical and affordable way than an isolation chamber if you're constantly working that equation. And everything can be overdone. So I'm just trying to warn people that this is not for everybody. And it's not just do whatever you want with it to get the effect out of it. But generally, if you use it as a charger in a space, it's pretty good. I found myself intuitively putting the Model X around my computer when I worked on it. I can't measure anything to say. I just kind of felt better with it there for some reason. Maybe that's the shungite talking through the water or whatever. I'm pretty sensitive to water, and I've had strange experiences with water over your norm. So those are not the normal for most people. Is it possible to scan the energy fields with activated hands? I would say so. A sensitive who's trained in that, Reiki people or non-Reiki people. And that's how I'm going to tune the level of, because the sensitives that I use would check the field by hand, by consumption, by feel, all the ways that, except they're really good with the hands. So they can measure how far the field's really strong, so they can kind of tell that, hey, out here it's nice and calm. If you get too close to it, it's a little too intense. And we can fine tune things that way. And everybody's different. Some people, most people are really doled out by modern day society. So my take there more or less is some people will benefit from really strong charging and other people who are sensitive won't. For me, I got tested by sensitives on my response to Grander's unit, and they said it was way too much for me. You'd have to dilute it. And our unit was all right, but could use a little bit more. And so there's the variance there, right? And our marketplace should be, in my opinion, especially in particular in this unit and even our other stuff, people who are interested in the life and living and changing properties of water. We're fine to sell to people who just want it on their home and they want healthier water for the kids, and that's the mass market. But these units in particular are designed for people who kind of the core of the group and the network was built on is these more etheric sides of it. But we shouldn't be making claims on it, because too much of anything can cause the problems and too little won't really do anything. And so the idea of this line is to provide a whole line where people can get a feel for what works for them and use it accordingly. So obviously, if you go with the most powerful unit, it's going to charge the fastest, it's going to do the most in the pour through, but it's also going to be at most risk to overcharging. So that kind of covers that. And I'm really fond of it. Thank you, Lila. I've been waiting to do this for 10 years because I've worked with the dielectric recipes, and getting involved in the structured water and the structured water communities exposed me to a lot more of the truth of crystals and materials and the research and the science behind it, and building that bridge between, computer logic people who do the same thing with crystals and somehow store an ass pile of images in a tiny little piece of sand, and it goes in and comes out and nobody can explain any of it. Even though that's the logical world that, wants to kind of tell everybody how the world works, and way too much of that in my opinion now. And we should go back into intuition and art form. And I'm really, really into art and the art of water, but I also understand it's important to measure and get a baseline for product development and doing responsible, doing our due diligence and responsibility of putting product out. But I'm really excited. These are really custom in a way. No two are ever going to be the same. And we'll also let people build their own recipe, because I can insert whatever I want into these equations. We have full dielectric control. We're still in development, and I'm doing the personal development until I think its process is established. And our production capability is very good. We can produce more than we can sell now by a long shot. We know that. on the base models. And then when you get to the upper ones, there's not going to be many people buying those, right off the bat because of the cost. I think it's experimentation, fun, learning, interaction, relationship with water, and also the space. And in my opinion, if you get synergistic with this stuff, you can do a lot to the space. And I didn't really know that at first, but the field effects are massive as the charge accumulates, and these are synergistic. So whatever colors you want, whatever atomic recipes, I do know how to arrange them in mathematical musical equation. So it's not like we're just chucking them in there. Throw a gram of gold, throw 3 gram. No, there's specific relationships to this stuff and how it goes together. And I'll hang on here for a few more seconds for any more questions. John, let me read this. Regarding pure palladium, gold, silver in a container of structured water, would this have health benefits? I'm not going to say that it potentially could have health benefits, and there are some books that cover this in great detail, and they've gotten pretty beat up over it coming out with it. But I do encourage to look at the work, Alpha Low. I'm going to type it in here. Go to Amazon, and it's on the Kindle, and it's 5 pages. So it's a hell of a lot better read than a lot of it. And this is off his dad's work, and David Gahn, who is an engineer. And basically they got pictures of water growing in itself, and that happens during when a pressurized field collapses under the right amount of resistance. So in other words, the correct combination of negative ode and positive ode together make a vortex of energy, quasi-revs torsion fields that have an effect on the environment and accumulate over time. And water would be the buffer for it. So water is going to naturally regulate overs and unders based on the region and by the Earth globe. Water is connected and is aware of itself all over the globe electrically. Some of that is very measurable and some of it not so much. But it's basically the Earth is one big freaking odic accumulator for growth. And the desert, kind of where the South Pole's too hard, or the blunt end of a crystal, right? So you can macro this stuff and micro it because it's universal. And I'll say this. You can decide for yourself what tools you want to use to help yourself heal. And a lot of these tools are used by a lot of people and believed to do such. And some of it's very well documented on what it can do. And you have to, people have to kind of go into that themselves. But we're definitely putting out a unit that favors regeneration and growth. And the water itself, there's a strong correlation and definition that the water grows solid material. So they're concentrating it now. This is dead nut science now. And what conditions actually cause it and what degree. And in our units, we believe it's very subtle. If you got a bunch of water and structured it and really, really concentrated it, then you'd see it under the larger microscopes, and you see it taking on the shape and pattern of life. It's kind of believed during the eukaryotic stage, in fetus growth until the pancreas forms. Basically, it's the water in the placenta that's shaping the proper shape. It goes through the lizard stage with the tail and all these different weird things, and then all of a sudden the early stages of the pancreas comes, and there's hormones involved in that, and all sorts of study on that. But basically they're undifferentiated cells, and water is starting to differentiate all on its own, meaning it's representing cell life, red blood cell life, bacterial life, all these things. The only caution I would give with overcharged water is it may push bacteria growth, and we tend to define it as good or bad, but all bacteria has a purpose, even pathogens. And so, less is more. And I think if you really want to do the area, then, doping your water correctly with palladium and gold and silver, which is some of the units will be built out of that. So the resonance between the water, between the flow form and the outer walls that are filled with this stuff in liquid glass form, will resonate. And that's part of the reason why I'm giving out some of the ingredients. I won't give out what proportions and what sizes and all that type stuff, but generally, people who are serious can figure this stuff out in development. These are no major secrets. Palladium is well known in the case of alpha low, even though they discuss it in the book Double Helix, but he doesn't discuss it. But they do have a better understanding of it now than the first discovery. And basically water's forming. All you need to, they talk about, you need algae or whatever if you go to space, water, and it's just water. Water itself in the right environment will begin to conjure up all life. And we saw that with atomic transmutation in some of our testing, that it wasn't transmutation. This stuff was being born in the water, and there was no account for transmutation in the layers. And it was the early elements, in particular the noble gases, which are kind of like the neutral spot for everything. They don't really interact with all this charged stuff all that much, so it's kind of on the ground layer. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of people who've really gone into this. So when we tie vibration into a fixed state and a mutative, what I like about this, and some of the quality materials going in here are at the highest level of orgone accumulators. And if you look at some of the more famed builders, the cheap ones are $1,200, and they're probably not using as good of stuff as we use. And so for the people who are really into that, I think you can do good with your space. I think they're going to be pretty powerful from that element. I think the concern is getting kind of bitter water out of it a bit if you overcharge it, which is what I've experienced when I let it ride too hard. But without the magnetic field array, you don't really see that happening. So I think what happens is I can't, you can't suppress the magnetic field array completely. And so over too long, you get a little bit of the magnetic field. We generally have about a 10-fold reduction on what the magnet would be normally. So we're cutting it down, 10-fold and really trying to limit that and just get the life. But I believe the magnetic field crawls in there if you leave it charged for too long. But I don't think that might necessarily be bad for like a field charger for the room is what I'm getting at. I have mapped out the fields a little bit. I think everything's okay there. And I think it'll be cumulative. And I also think that water probably needs changed out, but you can douse, you can do these things. Everybody douses well with water. Almost all, I've never seen a human being not douse well with water. So you can use dowsing rods to kind of check, set up your circumstances and use your intuition with instrument to check and do really well that way for setting these up for, harmonizing the situation. And when you pour the water in there, it's going to structure, not as major if it went all the way through, but you can shake the units and not fill it full, but don't shake them real hard. That doesn't work. I've measured that with instruments and I've not seen that work to date. Don't violently shake it, just gently shake it, like make like a river in there, a lazy river laying in there. And that'll kind of get things going and stirred up and the vortices going in a way that gets the whole process started and makes that water more alive and more respondent to the environment and has the best chance of making a big field. But I would say come the fall, probably Black Friday-ish, the CGZ series, which is the XY combined, will be a very good on a pour through and will be very good as a charger, and have to be extremely careful not to let it sit too long for drinking water. It's indisputable the taste that comes out of it, and it's just as Reichenbach described. It's warm and kind of bitter feeling. It almost reminds me of a dentist's office, the taste of the water, and I don't know what that means, but every dentist's office I've went into they must have something going on in there that makes like a similar smell or feel or sensation that I'm not aware of. Could be pain, who knows? But that would be the too much condition. So thank you all for your compliments. And there's a lot to look into on this if you want to go down those roads. So, the internet's a sea of both sides of the coin. But you can get some good books on the equation, really get into this stuff. And when you really get into the layers, it's fun and amazing stuff. So that'll wrap it up. I got this recorded. I'll try and clip it down to the pertinent parts to make a good short video. And thank you, everybody, for showing up. And look forward to getting you guys some of these units into play. And oh, one more thing, there's going to be a contest for the first P001 prototype of the CGZ, which is the most powerful one. And that'll be given away April 1st. And we'll give you the contest details. And it's basically going to be who gets the most reviews between now and then on some kind of measurable platform. So, we're encouraging dealers or sellers to collect up reviews on their current sales or their past sales so we can build that up a little bit. It's an important part for all of us to sell better. And that'll be the introductory price on that's going to be about $11.99 because it's got some expensive bleeping stuff in it. And it's made to be the best of the best. And it's made to be an active pleomorphic accumulator, which I'm sure people have done it. Like I said, the Earth is doing it. It's no new invention, but I haven't seen it on the marketplace a whole lot. And we should be able to reach that marketplace pretty good on both sides of the coin with the practical uses and benefits of structured water and as a field charger. So good stuff. And I'll be happy to give that out. You can contact us on any one of the units and how to get them when the time comes. Again, April 1st. If somebody wants to do an early prototype, I got a pile of them and still doing a lot of testing. And I'll be happy to have a conversation about that on the side, but there'll be no click to buy or wholesale purchase until April 1st. But privately, we might be able to build some for people and custom units to help get some feedback and tune on these things. Nothing's ever permanent. And so the idea is constant adjustment, improvement, and harmony. Thank you all. Take care. Have a good night.